بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اهتدى بهديه واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. This is our 27th class, and today we will be discussing Zakatul Fitr. Now, Zakatul Fitr is part of Allah's rights in the wealth that we have. So previously we discussed the fourth pillar of Islam, which is Zakat, or the third pillar according to how people would count them. And we said that it is a must in 4 or 5 categories. Now, after concluding that chapter that deals with Zakat, usually the scholars mention Zakatul Fitr or Sadaqatul Fitr. And this is something that is different to the previous chapter of Zakat, because Zakat that we talked about is either mandatory in gold, silver, or currency, is mandatory on livestock, camels, cows, sheep, goats. It's mandatory on the crops that are grown from the earth when harvested, such as corn, wheat, barley, etc. And it is mandatory upon the things that we trade in to make a profit. So commercial goods that are sold and bought and sold and bought, known as urud al-tijara. And the fifth category, which is rarely mentioned because it's rarely found, which is known as rikaz. And this is the treasure that people find hidden, and it has to be from the pre-Islamic era. So if you notice these 4 or 5 categories, the zakat is due on the wealth itself. But when we speak about Zakatul Fitr, it's different, because it's due on the individual and not on the wealth he possesses. What does that mean? It means that whether you are rich or poor, a specific amount that you must give out for each individual. And what is the ruling on it? The ruling on Zakat al-Fitr, it is mandatory. Ibn Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, says, Allah's Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made the Zakat al-Fitr a sa' of dates or barley, binding on every Muslim, slave or free, male or female, young or old. And there are other hadiths, such as the hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri and other companions, may Allah be pleased with them, all indicating that it is mandatory to give. Okay, are there any conditions for Zakat al-Fitr? Yes, there are. And the conditions mentioned here in the book, it says that it is recommended to be paid for the unborn. And this is not mandatory. This was suggested by Sayyiduna Uthman ibn Affan, may Allah be pleased with him, the third caliph, and it is a recommendation. But the vast majority of Muslims says that it is not mandatory, because It was not mandated by the Prophet ﷺ, but it is still something that is considered to be negligible for those who can afford it, and hence giving it would be something beneficial. So what are the conditions? One is that it is given on behalf of a Muslim, which means that if you have a non-Muslim wife, you don't give zakat al-fitr on her because she did not fast Ramadan. If you have a non-Muslim slave, you do not give zakat al-fitr on his behalf again because he is not a Muslim and he did not fast Ramadan. The second condition is that you have access. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. You have more that is in excess to what you require for today and tonight's program of, let's say, rice. So this is your lunch and dinner. Do you have one sa' extra? And 99.9% of the people would say, yeah, sure, we do. In this case, it's obligatory upon you. But Sheikh, I have $100,000 in debt. Still, you have to give. Sheikh, I didn't receive my salary for 6 months. Okay, let's look into your house. Do you have extra to what you will need for today's lunch and dinner? Because tomorrow's Eid, there's no lunch. So do you have extra for today's or tonight's dinner or tomorrow's lunch and dinner? I said, yeah, I have a lot of food in the kitchen. In this case, you have to give zakat. So these are the only two conditions that you have to bear in mind. Now, when we say that we give out zakat al-fitr, usually it is addressing the head of the family. So in my house, I have my wife, I have my children. I'm the head of the family. I'm the one who is obliged to give zakat al-fitr on each and every one of them. If I'm unable to do that, but they have money, then it becomes each one's own responsibility. So what is the purpose of zakat al-fitr? If you look at your textbooks, it says that zakat al-fitr is made a duty for a number of reasons. One, it's a spiritual purification, so that once you have finished fasting of Ramadan, you may have done wrong things here or there. So like in Fard prayer, when we pray our Fard prayer, Dhuhr prayer for example, why do we pray 6 rak'ahs voluntary, 4 before and 2 after? Scholars say that this tells the angels to look at his servant's prayer and how much of it was recorded and credited. And then Allah tells them to look for any voluntary prayers to compensate what was missing and to rectify the errors that took place. So Zakatul Fitr acts like such emphatic sunnah. Allah completes whatever was missing in your fasting through it. Secondly, it enables the poor to enjoy the day of Eid. It's only one day in a year. So if a real poor person does not have anything to eat on that day, that would surely be a very sad day. So just to secure the bare minimum for the poor, Islam orders us to look for them and to give them this zakat, so they would have secured the food of the day and they would not have to look for food. And as I said, this is the bare minimum for anyone to at least enjoy the Eid, is to secure his food. Thirdly, it's a form of expressing gratitude to Allah Azza wa Jal. So after going through 30 days of being hungry, being thirsty in Ramadan, then we tend to express our appreciation to Allah Azza wa Jal through feeding the poor and the needy and showing that we are also expressing our gratitude to Allah the Almighty Azza wa Jal. We move on to the following section, which is what and how much. So, do we give gold or silver in Sadaqat al-Fitr? Do we give a sheep or an animal? Or do we give crops? What is mentioned in the Sunnah when it comes to Zakat al-Fitr? Zakat al-Fitr is mentioned, as earlier read to you, in Hadith ibn Umar and also in Hadith Abu Sa'id al-Khudri and others, that it should be 1 sa'. And what is meant by sa'? I mentioned this earlier before in previous lessons, and I said that 1 sa', it is a measurement by size, like the liters. It's not a measurement by weight, like the pound or the kilograms. So it is or mud. And the mud is what we put in the 2 cupped hands of a regular, normal human being, a man. So you don't go to Southeast Asia where the people's hands are like this tiny, and you don't select an NBA basketball player with his hands like a big tray. You select the average human being, his hands, whatever he fills up in his hand, and filling it up not to that level. No, you just put it in deep and come out with it. So you'll find it piled up a little bit here. This is called mud. And 4 mud would constitute a sa'. Of course, if we take this mud as a means of measurement, we will find that we cannot say it is equivalent to so and so of kilograms, because being a measurement of size means that if we put barley, it wouldn't be as heavy as dates, and if we would put wheat, that wouldn't be same as barley, and if we put raisin, the same thing happens. So due to the difference in mass, putting a weight to it is not possible. It differs depending on what you put inside of it, that is the material. So what should it be of? Well, it should be something that is considered to be a staple food, something that can be stored. You cannot give Zakat al-Fitr 1 sa' of strawberries. You can do that from wheat, that is flour, dates, raisin, corn, barley, pastas, rice, beans, all of these things that can be stored and are weighed or measured by size rather than by weight. And this is an act of worship. Therefore, in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, when he named some categories of food, he then indicated that it is a sa' of food and gave examples. Now, people would ask, is it permissible to give it out in the form of cash? And the answer is, it's an issue of dispute. The vast majority of scholars, such as the school of Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, the three great schools of thought, say that this is prohibited because it was listed, it was specified at the time of the Prophet ﷺ to be given out in the form of food. Some scholars like Imam Abu Hanifa and those who followed him said that no, money is much better for the poor to utilize. Not only that, it was probably difficult to use money at the time of the Prophet ﷺ because not everyone had cash. So referring them to such staple food would be more convenient. Nowadays, it is difficult, especially if you are in industrial countries like in Europe, where you don't have poor per se, and if you give people who are in need staple food, they would resent it and maybe reject it. So which opinion is the most authentic? First of all, at the time of the, so they had money, and we know different hadiths where the Prophet ﷺ gave a dinar to one of his companions to buy a sheep from the market, and he went and bought a sheep for 1 dinar. Then another guy in the way bought it from him for 2 dinars. So he went back to the market and bought another sheep for a dinar and came back to the Prophet ﷺ with the dinar he gave him, which is a capital, and a sheep, the Prophet. So the Prophet was happy with that ﷺ and made dua for him. This means that they had money, they had cash. It's mentioned in the Quran. وَمِنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ مَنْ إِنْ تَأْمَنْهُ, and so on. So you can't say that this is or this was more convenient because you don't have any proof on that. Not only that, due to the fact that one sa' differs in weight, it also differs in value. So if I have in front of me 6 containers, each one is dates of barley, of wheat, of raisins, of rice, would the price be the same of these 5 containers? The answer is definitely not. Some is more expensive than the other. So when I want to give Zakatul Fitr, which price should I choose? And on what basis? You tell me choose the highest. Why? Why not the lowest? So again, you'll put yourself in a dilemma which Islam does not want you to put yourself in. It's exactly like when people come for Hajj and they want to sacrifice the qurbani, as they call it in Urdu. We call it in Arabic udhiyah. the sheep. So if someone says, well, listen, every year we slaughter a sheep, how about this year we slaughter 100 chicken? People would take that as a deal. Or someone says, why choose something that is cheap? I have a horse that is $10,000 worth. I'm gonna slaughter it and consider it to be udhiyah. Is this applicable? The answer is definitely not. It's not up to you and me to decide what to slaughter, what to sacrifice, what to give in zakat. This is something that was prescribed by the Sharia. It was the Prophet himself ﷺ, who said, give zakatul fitr as one sa' of food, of dates, of wheat, of barley, of aqt, dried milk. This is what he had ordered us. So we should not divert and choose something else. Now, the people would usually complain and say, Sheikh, we always see the poor, especially in Muslim countries, when we give them rice or dates or wheat, that they go and sell it with a cheaper price to the wholesalers and take cash for it, while the wholesalers would sell the rice again to someone who wants to give zakat al-fitr. So actually they are wasting and losing money. If we were to give them 12 riyals for the zakat al-fitr, it would have been more profitable for them than to take the rice and sell it for 10, and then the wholesalers, the merchants, sell it again for 11 or for 12. Well, you're right, but first of all, most likely those who are selling it, they are not the truly needy people. If you go to really needy people who cannot afford to eat, who fail to find a meal for today's food, these people will not sell it. Be hungry. You're giving your zakat al-fitr to people who are well off. If you go to industrial countries in Europe and the US, and people resent the fact that you give them staple food, this is a big indication that they're not needy. Look for the homeless. Look for those who do not have anything, who would appreciate whatever you give them because they are truly poor and needy. Besides, if your intention is to be kind to the people, to the poor, you're more than welcome to be. So when you give this sa' of zakat al-fitr to the poor, in this case, there's no problem, none whatsoever, to give them charity as well. So your zakat is 2.125 kilograms of rice. Give with them, give with it some money if you wish to the poor. Give them cash, $20, $30. There's no problem in that. But do not divert from the sunnah of the Prophet alayhi as-salatu was-salam. Okay, what else? Time. Okay, before we go to time, we said that how much is one sa'? So nowadays, Sheikh, what do you advise? Well, in Saudi Arabia and many Muslim countries, their staple food that they depend upon is rice. And the scholars here measured one sa' of rice, and they came up with a container, and when they filled it up with rice, which is 1 sa', they measured the weight of that rice and they found that it is equivalent to 2 kilograms, 0.125 grams of rice. So it's 2.125 grams of rice, and this is a sa'. And if you give 3 kilograms of any staple food, that would be more than what is needed, and the extra would be a charity, insha'Allah azza wa jal. Time. When should we disperse it, give it out? Zakat al-Fitr, its time begins after we are notified that tomorrow is Eid. So if today is the 29th of Ramadan, the sun sets, we're still unaware whether tomorrow is Eid or not. After a couple of hours, they declare that 2 witnesses saw the newborn moon, the crescent. Now it is time for us to give Zakat al-Fitr. And it has to be given out before the time of Eid prayer. So even after the break of dawn, we pray Fajr, and then after 1 hour from our Fajr prayer, the Imam comes and gives the Salat, the prayer of Eid, which afterwards he gives a sermon. So I can give my Zakat until the Imam begins his Salat. Once he begins his Salat, then I would have missed giving my Zakat on time, and it would be considered to be a general charity, like giving food any day of the year, not the prescribed Zakat al-Fitr. So this is the recommended time. When you know that it is Eid tomorrow, till before the prayer of Eid. But it is permissible to give before that, as it was narrated by Ibn Umar, may Allah be pleased with him and with his father, that the companions used to give Zakat al-Fitr a day or two before its time. So if you give it on the 28th, that's okay. If you give it on the 29th, that is also okay, and there's no problem in that, inshallah. Some scholars go even to say that you can give it from the beginning of Ramadan. Others say that after the 15th of Ramadan, you're entitled to give it out, but the most authentic opinion is that its time is limited. So a day or two before Eid would be accepted due to the hadith of the companion Abdullah ibn Umar, may Allah be pleased with him. The final section we have here is what is the ruling on the transfer of zakat to a different town. So I live in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and I don't know any poor people per se, personally. Definitely there are thousands and hundreds, tens of thousands of poor people. I don't know where they live. So is it permissible for me to send my zakat to a city that I know of? Let's assume to send it to Mecca or to Medina, because I know friends there who know really poor and desperate people. It's an issue of dispute. And the reason of this dispute is that there is the hadith of Mu'adh ibn Jabal, may Allah be pleased with him, where the Prophet said, alayhi salatu wasalam, said to him, and inform them, that is, the people you're calling to Islam, if they believe in the oneness of Allah and that the Prophet ﷺ is his servant and messenger, and they establish salat, then instruct them and order them that Allah has mandated upon them that they should give zakat, a money taken from their rich and returned back to their poor. So scholars said this is an indication that it is not permissible to give zakat outside of your city. And a lot of scholars adopted this opinion. Other scholars said, no, you misunderstood the hadith. The hadith was referring to money taken from the rich Muslim city or town. And the biggest evidence backing this opinion is that from Yemen itself, whenever they used to give zakat, they used to ship all the zakat money taken from Yemen to Medina, and they would distribute it in Medina and elsewhere, not in Yemen itself. So scholars say that this is the most authentic opinion. When wherever there is a need for zakat money, it can be reallocated. So I'm an expat working in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and it's time to give my zakat money, whether on my savings or on zakat al-fitr itself. And here I don't know any poor person. Yes, I do know organizations that collect zakat, but I don't feel like giving it to them. I don't know them. I know they're legitimate and official, but I know my family in Pakistan or in Bangladesh or in Sri Lanka who are poor and needy. I know my village people in my hometown who are below the poverty line. So I'd like to send my zakat to them. Is that permissible? The answer is yes, there is no problem in doing that, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. This is all the time, or this is all the material we have for today's class. So I think we should go to the questions that were pending from last lesson and see where we go from there, inshallah. Hasleen says, if we are following on daily basis Hanafi madhab timings for prayer, for some necessity, can we follow Muslims Pro's app timings if we want to pray early? See, what counts is not what app you're following. It's not what madhab you're following. What counts? Asr timing in most countries is about 4 o'clock, maybe 3:45, maybe 3:30. But those who follow the Hanafi madhab would find that Asr is called at 5 o'clock. So it's almost an hour difference. So which one is following the Sunnah? Without a doubt, the Hanafi madhab is delaying it, and it's wrong. What they're doing is wrong. How dare you say they're wrong? They're a reputed madhab and school of thought. Akhi, either they're wrong or the Maliki, Hanbali, Shafi'i school of thought are wrong. So which one you would choose? I never thought of it this way. Not only that, refer back to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. When Jibreel came to him in Mecca over the duration of 2 days. In the first day, he prayed in the beginning of the time. And the second day, he prayed at the end of the time of the 5 daily prayers. And then he told the Prophet ﷺ that prayer time is in between. When we come to Dhuhr prayer, we know that the time of Dhuhr is from the Zawal. which is 5-7 minutes after the sun leaves the meridian and goes to the east, leaving a short shade directing to the west. Let me rephrase that. The time of Dhuhr is when the sun rises and then goes to the zenith, or the meridian, I think they call it, 5-7 minutes. When it goes to the west, to the east, there is a short shadow that increases as the sun goes to the west. Once the erect object has a shade to the east equal to its size, the Hanafi people say the time of Asr begins when the shade is twice the length of the erect object. And this is a big problem. First, because those who follow the Hanafi madhab, if they pray Dhuhr at that time, their prayer is invalid, because the time of Dhuhr finishes when the shade is the same length as the erect object, and they're praying it afterwards, so their Dhuhr is invalid. And it goes against the hadith. It clearly goes against the hadith of Jibreel. So, coming back to your question, Hasleen, you should not follow the Hanafi madhab or the XYZ madhab. You should follow the timings of the Prophet ﷺ. And the best, to my knowledge, in calculating the times of prayers is al-Qura calendar or timetable for Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr and Maghrib. For Isha, do not follow them, because they are fixed on having Isha to be an hour and a half after sunset, which is wrong. And in Ramadan, they're fixed on having it on 2 hours. And again, this is too wrong. So if your Muslim Pro app follows al-Qura, because you can choose different timings in the settings. If you choose al-Qura, then yes, you can pray even if the adhan was not called in your Hanafi predominantly dominated area. Fatima says, if anyone paid zakat to whom zakat shouldn't be given, what would happen? If anyone prays without wudu, what would happen? Prayer is invalid. If anyone fasts at night, what would happen? Fasting is invalid because it was not done on time. It was not done the proper way. So if someone gives zakat to a rich person, then this is not zakat. Daughter, or to his wife, whom he's obliged by law, by sharia, to provide for them. His zakat is not valid, and he has to give it again to someone that needs it. Mutairo Imuni says, is it permissible to use money as zakat al-fitr? We went through that, and we said that the most authentic opinion is it is not permissible. Fida says, is zakat al-fitr part of the pillars of Islam or only zakat al-mal? It is part of Islam upon those who are able to pay them. So it is mandatory. It's the same ruling with zakat al-mal. Dino says, since the masjids in my area are closed due to the coronavirus, do I have to give adhan at home? Is it obligatory to make the 2 adhans of Fajr? First of all, calling the adhan is a highly recommended sunnah, provided that it is not called in the city you're in. So I'm in Jeddah, we also have a lockdown on praying in masjids, but all the masjids in my city call the adhan. So there is no need for me to call the adhan because the notification had taken place. When it comes to iqama, the answer is yes. You are recommended to give iqama if you're praying, leading the prayer with your family, or if you're praying on your own. As for adhan al-fajr, this was answered. What about if I don't live in a Muslim country and there are no masjids in the vicinity calling the adhan? In this case, yes, call the adhan. And for fajr, call the adhan as well if there are people who might want to fast in your home and don't know about the approaching of fajr time, or people who are praying night prayer and don't know that they have to offer witr, etc. Isra says, does monthly cycle get in the way of a woman earning rewards, as she must stop praying and fasting in the month of Ramadan? I've been told it will be harder to get to Jannatul Firdaus for her because she's lacking. Male women without cycle have a better chance going there since they don't stop worship. What you heard is not true. There is a beautiful hadith. It consoles us, those who cannot go to pray in the masjid. It hurts us not to go to pray Fajr like we've been doing for all of our lives, using a cane, barely able to stand, weeping because they're unable to pray Fajr. All of their lives they've been praying in the masjid, in the first row, reading so many chapters of the Quran between adhan and iqamah, and between prayer and prayer, instead of going back home. They can't do that anymore. So what consoles us? The Prophet said, alayhi salatu wasalam, whenever a person falls sick or travels, Allah would record for him whatever he used to do from the good deeds while he was healthy and residing. Allah is most generous. So even though we're saddened by this calamity that we're unable to pray in the masjid, yet we are confident that Allah Azza wa Jal would reward us, because when we were healthy, we used to pray every single prayer in the masjid, not skipping a single one. Some of us used to sit between Fajr and sunrise, remembering Allah Azza wa Jal and making dhikr and reading the Quran. Allah would restore this and register it to you as if you're still doing it. So there's no need for you to worry, Isra. 23 days a month, you offer tahajjud, you pray witr, you fast Mondays and Thursdays, you read the Quran, you do a lot of good things, and when you get your cycle, you prevent it from doing these two things, fasting and praying. Allah would register that for you, would reward you for that, because you used to do that when you were healthy and not having a problem. But this is not the end of the life. This is not the end of life. You can still gain a lot of good rewards, even if you have your month recite the Fatiha, teach them how to pray, teach them the fundamentals of Tawheed, make them memorize short surahs, and they read such surahs till the rest of their lives, and you're getting reward. Imagine the reward you would get in Ramadan when you cook food, a little bit extra to what your family eats, and you give it to the masjid. Share it with the poor. Help fasting people to break their fast. Dhikr you can say whenever you are unable to pray, but you see people praying, and you repeat La ilaha illallah, or Subhanallah wa bihamdih, or Subhanallah alhamdulillah Allahu Akbar la ilaha illallah wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, and you repeat that hundreds and hundreds of times. Definitely you will be in better shape than so many of those who pray and not do what you do, and Allah knows best. Uzma says, can a man stop praying in the masjid due to COVID-19? Well, we made, or I made, actually it's a teamwork, so we made a video on Ask Zad, and I think it's on my YouTube channel, where I said that this, that is the praying in the masjid, is something one of two. Either it's selective decision or it's enforced by the authorities. If it were a selective decision, I personally would go and pray in the masjid. Why? Because coronavirus, or the COVID-19 to be exact, the people that recover from it, the percentage is huge, approximately 80%. Those who die as a result of it are between 3 to 5% worldwide. So it is not as contagious or as dangerous pandemics that were fatal and claimed the lives of so many. Yet it is dangerous. So, and the normal flu is dangerous. So if a person takes the necessary precautions, stays away from physical contact, stays away from anyone who has the symptoms, washes his hands thoroughly with soap, does not touch his face, eyes or nose or mouth before that, then you're safe inshallah. As long as you observe your adhkar in the morning, in the evening, before you leave your home, you are inshallah protected. But if this is enforced by the government, like it is in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, in Malaysia, in Jordan, so many Muslim countries, in this case, it doesn't matter what I think of it. First, I'm not a physician. I'm not a specialist. I'm not a doctor. Secondly, I am a member of the society, governed and bound to obey my Muslim ruler. So if my Muslim ruler says we have to skip praying in the masjid for a limited period of time due to the following reasons, 1 to 10, okay, I am obliged to obey him. How dare you, Sheikh? He's preventing you from praying in the masjid. No, he's not preventing me. He is selecting a decision which, according to his advisors, medical advisors and scientists, backed by the major muftis of our country, who are well-known scholars, they all give him the same advice, which is that this is legit and it's permissible to lock down the masjids for a couple of weeks or a little bit more until the percentages and the infections subside. So I feel no problem in obeying them. Does it hurt my heart? Of course it does. But again, as Muslims, we do not, and the Sunnah, whatever Allah Azza wa Jal tells us, we follow. Sheikh, Allah told us to pray in the masjids. Yes, this is true. but Allah also told us to obey the Muslim ruler. So if the Muslim ruler tells us not to pray in the masjid, should we obey him or obey Allah? If you're praying in the masjid and the masjid was set on fire, would you continue to pray or run the heck out of it? No, I would run. Why? Because I'm saving my lives. Touche. Saving your life is important, and saving the lives of others is important. If you're not infected, you cannot tell whether you are a carrier or not. Now again, it doesn't matter what I believe, whether this is a conspiracy, whether this was done for economical reasons, it doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm not a specialist, I'm not a physician, and I have to follow the orders and the instructions of my Muslim ruler. I have to abide by the law, and in my home I can pray without any problem, and I am confident that Allah would reward me as if I'm praying in the masjid as usual. And Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. GN Engineer Limbanga. The question is, if one house was inherited by 12 people and each has a portion of it, say each has one room, are they obliged to pay zakat? The answer is no. Am I obliged to pay zakat on my thobe, on my head garment, on my watch? No. On my mobile, on my cameras, on my PDA? No. The things that I use are not zakatable. My car, my house. And I said again, G. Eng Limbanga, but maybe you were not paying attention. And this happens to the best of us. If you master the categories of wealth that you have to give zakat over, you will be relaxed. Gold, silver, and currency. Number one. Livestock, cattle. Number two. Grain, dates, raisins, etc. Number four. Things that are used to selling and buying. Things that we sell and buy for commercial use, to make profits. Things that are sold and bought. So coming back to your question, the house that you've inherited, are you selling and buying for the purpose of making a profit? No, we inherited and each one took a flat or a room. There's no zakat. What about Sheikh, if we decided to sell the house and cash the inheritance? Go ahead, sell it. There's no zakat. But we sold it. Yes, but this was not meant to be sold and bought. You don't have a grocery shop where you sell cans of mushroom. You sell and you get money, you buy new cans of mushroom. This is used for commercial use and for making profit. I'll give you a final example. Our time is almost over, which would blow your mind, hopefully. Did you master the 4 or 5 categories of wealth? Yes, Sheikh, we understand it completely. Okay, I'll give you an example. A person has a lot of money and bought a fleet of cabs, taxi cars. So he bought 100 cabs, and he has drivers driving round the hour, collecting customers and dropping them places and collecting money. Now these 100 cabs he bought on installments. So whatever profit he makes pays the salaries, the expenses, and what's left he gives it to the car company that sold him in installments. How much zakat does he have? Well, that's easy, Sheikh. 0, because he has 0 savings. Good answer. What about the cars? The cars are not his yet. He does not possess them. They're on installments. Very smart. Okay, smart Alec. What about if, I don't know, should we estimate how much the value of the car on today's prices, or should we go to the second hand market? No, there's no zakat. What? The cars, 100 cars is approximately maybe $1 million worth, maybe less. A lot of money, yes, but there's no zakat on it. Sheikh, yes, because they don't fall under the categories of wealth. Is he selling and buying the cars? No, he's renting them. So there is no zakat on it. And the profit he's making, if the profit, the revenue, stays with him for a whole lunar year, he gives zakat. I'll give you another example, and this is extra. I have $50 million. That's a lot of money. And I bought with these $50 million 50 buildings as real estate, residential apartments, 50 of them. Each one is $1 million worth. And I'm getting revenue on yearly basis from the rent. I'm leasing them. People are paying me rent. I have duplexes, I have studios, I have one room, I have 4 rooms, different. At the end of the year, I get it, well, actually at the beginning of the year, because people pay in advance. So this amount of money, and let's assume it is 5 millions a year, revenue, 10% of the 50 million investment. With this 5 millions, I immediately take it and buy 5 new residential buildings. How much zakat do I have to pay? Nothing. Ya Sheikh, I have $55 million worth of property. True. Do you have any savings in the bank? No. Do you sell and buy in real estates? No. There's no zakat on you. And this is the beauty of Islam. It gives you guidelines that you can measure, that you can draw with a ruler. It is something that is structured, scientific, based on evidence. So with this, we come to the conclusion of today's class. Until we meet next Monday, stay safe, and may Allah Azza wa Jal protect us all, and may Allah Azza wa Jal unveil this calamity and save us from it and our loved ones, and restore the prayers in the masjids, and restore the umrah in Mecca, and restore our visits to the masjid of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. Wallahu a'lam wa nisbatul ilmi ilayhi aslam, wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala nabiyyina Muhammad.